I just want to ask you about this last issue, which is, as you probably saw, Harvard settled 2 lawsuits this week where students had alleged that Harvard had taken insufficient steps to protect them from the dangers of anti-Semitism. And as part of that settlement, they agreed to adopt the radically expanded definition of anti-Semitism that the House of Representatives last year also voted to implement as part of anti-discrimination law in the educational context, whereby it's a definition that Israel has pushed for and created that includes very concrete examples of things that if you say you are now guilty formally of hate speech and anti-Semitism, including some things that you said in this very discussion with me, such as comparing the Israeli government and its actions in any way to anything that the Nazis have done. That's something that you've done. It prohibits people from talking about Israel being a racist entity, even though you can say that about any other country. Whole long list of things that you're no longer allowed to say, that certain Jewish individuals might have greater loyalty to Israel than the United States. That's banned too, even though it's obviously so true about certain people. And this is here, we're talking here about academia, the place where free thought and free discourse is most supposed to thrive. That's the reason why people have tenure and the like. And there's clearly an attempt, and I think it goes back to that example that you made of that fear that the Israelis have of what happened to South Africa, where a lot of the activism was centered on college campuses. That was sort of a cause of that generation and college campuses, and they decided that it was crucial to curb political speech inside the United States and on campuses specifically when it comes to criticism of Israel. And it seems to me like they're really succeeding, and this seems to me as well to be a trend that Trump and his entire administration support. Is this something that, as somebody who is an academic, who has spent your adult life inside academic institutions, is of concern to you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think almost all academics think that what's happened with this Harvard case is disastrous. It's terrible. And I'm sort of an extremist on free speech. I'm like you on this issue, and I'm appalled at what's going on here. The broad definition of anti-Semitism is ridiculous, right? Anybody who criticizes Israel in a serious way turns out to be an anti-Semite, according to this definition. We should be able to criticize Israel as we see fit, and we ought to be able to criticize the United States as we see fit. What happened to free speech here? These are, elite universities, places like Harvard. I mean, this should not be happening. But you see what's happening here, Glenn, is that this is the lobby that's driving this. It's just very important to understand that. This is pressure from donors that force the administration, the Harvard administration, to settle this case. But what's going on here is that it is becoming increasingly difficult to defend Israel. This gets back to our earlier discussion about what the historical record is going to say moving forward about what Israel did. The lobby is now in a position where it's becoming incredibly difficult to defend Israel. The mask is off. So they're playing hardball politics, or what I like to call smash mouth politics. And this is an example of it. And universities are very dangerous places from the point of view of the lobby, because you have freedom of speech. And when you have freedom of speech, people are free to criticize Israel. And the lobby wants to stop that. It's just like they stopped these protests. You had all these protests where basically students, many of whom were Jewish, that should be underlined 3 times, many of these students were Jewish who were protesting against what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. And instead of it being treated, or all these cases being treated as protests against the genocide, it got turned into cases of anti-Semitism. These were all just a bunch of anti-Semites coming out and saying hateful things about Jews in Israel because they're anti-Semites. And that's the picture that the lobby has worked hard to portray in the United States. It bears no resemblance to reality. But this is what the lobby has to do at this point in time. Just want to ask yourself the question moving forward: how is the lobby going to deal with the fact that what has just happened in genocide has been so thoroughly documented, and people are going to comment on it? And that you have a ruling by the ICJ about genocide in January of 2024, and a ruling from the ICC that led to arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and former defense minister. How are they going to deal with all these things? How are they going to deal with the fact that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have declared in big, lengthy studies that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide? This is a huge problem. So what they're doing is they're in overdrive to crack down, and they are beginning to thwart free speech. That's what's going on here.
Yeah, it's amazing that the same people who have spent the last decade waving the banner of free speech, decrying censorship, complaining about the tactic of accusing all your enemies of being bigots and racists and whatever as a way of shutting down free debate, are now completely behind this crackdown. And it would be one thing to lose our core free speech rights because our own government and our own country has decided that we are too much of a crisis to permit free speech, but to lose our free speech rights because some foreign country on the other side of the world is insisting that they not be criticized within the United States is something that is appalling and remarkable to watch, and yet it's exactly what's happening. And these institutions, one after the next, are acquiescing to it under great pressure, and it's hard to overstate how threatening it is.
Exactly. And I just add one final point to this. Jews have benefited enormously from living in a liberal society. Liberalism is something that Jews cherish because it has protected them in all sorts of ways. But what's happening here is you're threatening basic liberal values. You're going after freedom of speech. It's one of the core liberal values that all Jews should be working overtime to protect. But because of Israel and because of its atrocious behavior, you have a large slice of Jews, and I'm not saying all Jews here by any means, but you do have a large slice of Jews who are willing to sacrifice freedom of speech to protect Israel. This, in my opinion, is not in the interest of Jews, not to mention Americans in general.
Yeah, it's something that needs to be said, and said loudly, and said emphatically, and I'm very grateful that you are one of the people who not only now but for a long time have been willing to stand up on these issues despite the risk and the attacks and the costs that they constantly invoke. And in addition, it's always great to speak with you more broadly about issues because of the perspective that you bring and the way you express yourself. I'm always grateful for your time, and it's great to see you, and we'll have you back on shortly as always.
Thank you, Glenn. It's my pleasure being here. Always fun to talk.
Absolutely. Feel the same way. Talk to you soon.